Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, Harry Kane. He settled some old scores by hitting the Wembley winner in the North London derby at Wembley yesterday. Can Pep really change the way English football is played when he meets the referees chief Mike Riley? And Jose Mourinho, he wants to add to his trophy cabinet with an award for the best behaved boss. Three rowdy guests with us this morning. Steve Bates, he's the chief football writer with The People. Alyson Rudd is a sports writer with The Times. And Jeremy Wilson is the deputy football correspondent with The Daily Telegraph. Morning to you all. Good to see you as ever. Thanks for coming on. Don't forget, you can tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on the screen over the next 90 minutes. Just keep them clean. OK, let's have a look at the back pages then. The Sunday People this morning. It's the slayer, Harry Kane, scoring the Wembley winner yesterday. And the stayer, Steve, with us this morning. He says that Mauricio Pochettino is already talking to Tottenham about next summer's transfer targets. He's staying put. Same story this morning. Paul Hetherington's got it as well in The Star. Mauricio Pochettino about to extend his stay at White Hart Lane. The top four, Sergio Aguero, 4 goals yesterday for him in a Manchester City shirt and top floor. Arsene Wenger, he says he won't use the Europa League as a way to get into the Champions League next season. He should do. He's not going to do it in the Premier League. The Sunday Times this morning, Antonio Conte would have to be stupid. Chelsea would have to be stupid to sack their title-winning manager. Jose Mourinho in action this afternoon with Manchester United playing Newcastle at St James's Park. Maybe I have to cry like Pep to protect my players. We're coming onto that discussion in part 2 this morning. Sunday Mirror's take on Mourinho's press comments. The perfect one. He wants to lift the trophy for being the best behaved boss in the technical area. That would certainly be a first for him. The Sunday Express, they say Marco Silva sacked by Watford. He's the next manager at Chelsea when they sack Antonio Conte. We'll come on to him a bit later on. Some hard-hitting stuff this morning in the Mail on Sunday. As ever with Oliver Holt, this time it's with Kieran Dyer, an interview with the former Ipswich, Newcastle and England player, of course. And Kieran says that he suffered sex attacks as a child. It's some required reading this morning with Oliver, and Kieran Dyer, a player who was cherished by all the clubs that he played for, Ipswich, of course, West Ham, Newcastle, England, over the years. OK, let's move on to, first things first, the North London derby, because we were all there yesterday. It was the game of the day at the 12:30 kick-off, Wembley Stadium. What did you take from it? What were your impressions, Steve? What did we learn?
I think what we learned was that Tottenham are in a far better place than Arsenal are at the moment. You know, the way they went about the game just tells you everything really about where they are at the minute. They're a team brimming full of confidence. OK, they kind of slipped out of the top 4 a few weeks ago, but they're having a charge now. 7 points from games against Manchester United, Liverpool and now Arsenal is a pretty good return in the last couple of weeks. But I think more than anything, what they've done in those 2 weeks is kind of re-established themselves as the kind of team that Mauricio Pochettino wants them to be. Because I think for a while they kind of just slipped away from that, slipped off the pace. I know they've got some injuries to contend with, but I thought yesterday they you know, it's quite stark watching them against an Arsenal team who've spent quite a lot of money in recent times, and just Tottenham looked such a better balanced team, players who looked hungry and up for the challenge. And I know Arsenal made a bit of a fight back at the end, but I think Tottenham could have won by 3, 4, 5 goals yesterday, and you couldn't have complained.
How emphatic was it, though, Steve, in terms of the Tottenham performance? Because it just looked like... and the way they played and the way they approached it was they wanted to send a very, very clear message that they're on top now.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I think for many years that the one thing Arsenal, when they've not been winning trophies, the one thing Arsenal fans could perhaps comfort themselves with is the fact that they're top dogs in North London, but I'm afraid that's no longer the case now. I think we've seen an erosion of that dominance by them, and I think Tottenham look set now to be top dogs in North London for quite a while because, as I say, the balance, the shape, the way they play, the hunger of the manager and the players. And I think it's a stark contrast really between Pochettino and Wenger. Wenger clearly looks like a man who's sort of on the escalator out, and whereas Pochettino is clearly a man who knows what he's doing. He's got the backing of everybody there. Everyone's together, and I think looking at that, you know, they probably will get a top 4 place.
What was the most impressive aspect of that performance yesterday?
The belief in what they're doing, I think. They were the same minute one as they were at the end, Spurs. There was no sense of panic when the chances didn't go in the second half. while I agree Spurs were by far the better team, Arsenal should have equalised at the end. And if they had, we'd have been sat around this table saying, same old Spurs can't convert their superiority in terms of elegance of play into getting the points they deserve from the performance. So there is still that sense of they're not, why didn't they convert the chances that they created? There is still a flimsiness to Spurs, it has to be said. But they were worthy winners. They were very attractive to watch. And I think, a lot of people call them their sort of second team now, just simply because there is an English core there, and also even if they lose, you come away thinking that was nice. You can see what Pochettino wants to do, and I love their self-belief. I love the fact they stick to their game plan, and they've got the balance completely right. They've got the calm presence at the back. They've got incredibly solid player in Dembele, who's probably the underrated player of the season, I suspect, because there's so many flashy players in that Spurs team. And you've got someone like Eriksen, who's a very understated player who can just make a team tick along beautifully. And then you've got Harry Kane, who's defying the odds by, now successive seasons proving that he knows how to get the goals.
Mm. With one of the most interesting aspects after the game, I thought, and was fascinating, was the exchange between Matt Barlow at the Mail and Mauricio Pochettino, because Matt asked Tottenham's manager why Toby Alderweireld wasn't in the squad yesterday, having played against Newport County in the FA Cup tie in the week. What were your observations on that exchange? Because Pochettino clearly wasn't happy with the question about one of his central defenders not being in the squad yesterday.
It was odd because it was quite an innocuous question. It was why did you play this player and not play that player? And you think you're fairly justified to ask that. It's not the most scandalous inquiry. And Pochettino took great umbrage to it. He was like, "Why are you asking that? We've just won the North London derby." And to be honest, I was sort of not paying 100% attention because Pochettino was just sort of talking through how great Tottenham had been, which was fair enough. And then suddenly your antennae was up and you thought, what's going on there? There's an issue here. He was similar with questions about Danny Rose when Danny Rose was out of the team. He was still out of the team.
Who was on the bench yesterday.
Yeah, earlier in the season. And we know that Alderweireld's got a contract situation going on behind the scenes, and it just makes you think that it made me think there's more of an issue than I'd probably suspected before. And,
did you get the impression that Pochettino wanted to revel in that victory and the significance of it for a bit longer?
I think he did. I think there might have been a bit of a, why are you honing in on what he took to be a negative? But the very fact that he took that to be a problematic area to go into, I thought was quite telling in itself. And I think the way Pochettino's handled the Spurs squad, it's one of his great strengths in the last 2 or 3 years. He's not like Mourinho. You don't necessarily know there's a problem. He doesn't sort of come out and dig players out openly, but he very quietly gets rid of people who he doesn't want around. Now, I don't know if that's the case with Toby Alderweireld, but it made you suspect that a little bit. He's been incredibly... there was one summer where there was about 8, 9, 10 players that just... The transition, I think it was 2 or 3 summers ago, and he's very, very ruthless if he thinks that a player is not... Everything for Tottenham is about buying into that intensity, that work rate, that ethic, that team spirit. And I don't think it matters who the player is. I think that to him is more important than any individual. So I think that'd be really interesting how that plays out.
His reaction to Matt's question almost kind of created a story where there wasn't one, and probably we weren't looking for one, but his reaction was kind of so extreme that kind of created a story, really. Obviously,
what was your interpretation of it, Steve? What was your reading?
Well, clearly, as Jeremy's just alluded to there, Pochettino, he's kind of not a demonstrative guy, but he's pretty ruthless. If anybody doesn't want to play for Tottenham or causes any problems, he's kind of quite ruthless in the way that he will deal with them. Alderweireld played against Newport in the week, and he's not playing at Wembley against Arsenal in the North London derby. So draw your own conclusions. In the background, obviously, there's a contract issue with him, I think obviously there's rumours that maybe he wants to leave at the end of the season, and if that vibe is being picked up by Pochettino, he will sort of deal with that ruthlessly. And Danny Rose, for instance, really hasn't been the same Danny Rose, getting the same number of games since he came out and did the piece with Dave Kidd in the Sun earlier in the season.
Yeah.
I had a different reading of it, which was that I think Pochettino thought maybe the question was questioning whether Alderweireld is a better defender than Sanchez, and Pochettino thought maybe the media were trying to say, we all love Alderweireld, why isn't he in the team? We know better. Because we have over the seasons really liked that pairing with Vertonghen and Alderweireld. They would be in last season they were in everybody's team of the season, that pairing. And so Sanchez has come in, and I think he's made he's very athletic, and he imposes well, but I mean, he's not as elegant as Alderweireld. Maybe Pochettino thought, hang on, you're trying to say I don't know my players, or I don't know my best players, and he was protecting him to a degree.
Could have very easily just said, I've got 3 centre-backs and I see them all as equal standard at the moment. I mean, Sanchez was at fault at the end for the Lacazette, where Arsenal nearly equalised. I mean, I think he's been brilliant, but he's likely to, a bit like David Luiz, he's likely to.
But if there was a mistake, it was pretty much the only mistake Spurs made in the entire.
Yeah, and it was nearly costly. But I think it would have been quite easy to just pass off if it was just a selection or a fitness, resting, rotational issue. He could have just passed it off, and no one would have really sort of batted an eyelid at it.
The idea that this is all one big happy family at Tottenham. On the pitch, behind the scenes, between Pochettino and his players, Ali, ultimately, is that a successful winning formula?
Well, I think
they're getting results. But
and you have to believe.
We know what the demands are, or we know what the next stage is.
Yeah, you don't go through what Spurs are going through at the moment, which is having to get used to Wembley, put up with all the criticisms that they couldn't handle Wembley. It is difficult when you rebuild your ground. That only works if you feel like it's part of a bigger project, that you're doing it with the bigger picture in mind. And that's why the contrast with Arsenal is so interesting, because they did the transfer from old to new stadium seamlessly, and Wenger bought into it, and nobody doubted for a minute that Wenger was the man to oversee that transition, and he would be given time to make sure they bedded in well when they finally got their new home. And the same thing has to apply with Spurs. None of this works unless we read that Pochettino is thinking about his contract and he's going to see it through. That has to work. And it does actually stop a lot of it dampens down a lot of but where's the trophy? And they do need to win a trophy. They're too good not to win a trophy. But the pressure to win a trophy is diluted slightly if you know that going forward, he will be given time to keep building that team in their new stadium, and then you can judge them.
The thing I think, though, with Tottenham, I know Steve said that they look like they're going to go on and sort of extend the gap. I think they've done an incredible job. I think they are the team that you could sort of praise the most in the Premier League, what Daniel Levy's done, the way that they've organised the club. But you've just got... I think the situation is quite fragile just because of their financial constraints, and there's players. I mean, what does they must all read the papers and know that Mesut Ozil was supposedly or contract was above 300,000 a week, what Sanchez was on, and I just feel that I think there's I don't want to say this is as good as it's going to get for Tottenham, because it's a young team and they've done fantastically.
So you've never had it so good, put it another way.
I just think that the reality of football that we've seen over and over again is if you punch above your weight financially, clubs will come in and try and take your best players, and that creates and it's how they now handle that next summer, and that's why I think for Pochettino and Tottenham, this season might be the season where they need to get that trophy, where it could be their big chance in the Champions League, because it's just hard to sustain that.
Yeah, maybe also the problems might start when they do win something, because then their players will think, hang on, I've won a league title, I've won trophies, I deserve to be rewarded for that and paid for that. And clearly Tottenham probably aren't in the bracket of United, City, possibly even Chelsea on wages.
Yeah. Let's finish off with Pochettino. You believe his statement, this is on the back page of the People this morning, that Tottenham more accurately believe that Pochettino will stay, that they can fend off the advances of Real Madrid, and they are coming. What convinces Tottenham that he's staying?
Well, I think, my sort of evidence is the fact that Pochettino has been involved in planning meetings for the summer. Now, you might say, OK, fair enough, well, he's a professional guy, he would do that anyway. But, you know, the club have just bought him Lucas Moura. The talks are going on about who he wants in the summer. I can't imagine him really getting into those kind of details if he's thinking of leaving. Obviously, there's no offer from Real Madrid on the table. But if you analyse it, you know, why on earth would you leave a club like Tottenham for Real Madrid? Real Madrid are probably at their lowest ebb for maybe the last 10 years. Their squad's ageing. All their senior players, Ramos, Ronaldo, Benzema, they're all in the... Modric, they're all in their 30s now. He's building a young team at Tottenham. They're about to go into a new stadium. Premier League is the Premier League. I think he'd be absolutely crazy to leave, and I don't believe seriously that he wants to leave Tottenham.
You'd turn down Real Madrid to stay at Tottenham?
Well, you probably would. Well, why wouldn't you at the moment? Listen, if Real Madrid can sack Zinedine Zidane...
They haven't. They won 5-2 last night.
But if they do that, then, hey, you know, Pochettino could be gone in 6 months. Does he really want, as a 45-year-old coach, does he really want to put that gun to his head? A place like Real Madrid, where they're obviously they're kind of more ruthless than Chelsea when it comes to sacking managers.
He's been pretty ruthless in his 2 moves, though, when he's come to... You know, he negotiated the Southampton move and he left Southampton. I think Pochettino, as charming as he is, will do what he thinks is right for his career.
But I don't think there's a lack of support above him at Tottenham. Sure, he saw the limitations at Southampton. And obviously, you know, Real Madrid have got vast wealth. They can pretty much buy who they want.
The jump from Southampton to Tottenham, I'd argue the jump from Tottenham to Real Madrid, if you look at the finances, is probably he's going to have more resources than he had in the jump that he had before, if that makes sense.
I think
it's a bit for him. He might look at it and say that's an even greater opportunity.
I think if Tottenham was stuttering and stumbling this season, and you know, maybe there was a threat from Levy that they couldn't turn down 200 million for Harry Kane, I'm sure he would probably reassess that.
Sure.
But if they were stuttering, Real Madrid wouldn't want him.
No.
I mean, it's hard to believe he can leave without winning a trophy. Partly because if you put all that effort into bringing through those youngsters, why leave and let someone else come in and take them?
Of course,
the glory.
Okay. Let's have a chat about Arsenal. What did we see yesterday? Because they beat Everton 5-1 the previous week at the Emirates, and everything's good. This is the new era. Martin Keown talking endlessly this week about the new Arsenal. The mood has been lifted. The dark clouds have moved on, and then they play Tottenham.
And they were well beaten. I mean, Wenger said afterwards we could have won the game by half-time, and I don't know. I mean, Arsenal's first shot in the game was, I think, in the Wilshere in the 68th minute.
It's so confusing when they say things like that.
I couldn't understand where he was coming from.
Could.
And it was the difference. I thought it was just the intensity that Tottenham play at. And they bullied Arsenal from the front upwards, from Kane, Eriksen, Ali, Son, the way they just had Arsenal pinned back for long periods of the game, and it made you wonder whether the way Wenger has sort of historically accepted flair players who don't work in the same way as Pochettino teams and Mourinho, what they expect of those front players, and I'm thinking obviously of Ozil and Mkhitaryan, whether at the very, very highest level, whether you can carry players like that in those type of games. They're obviously great when you just drop down a few percentage against Everton or other teams, but whether you can get away with that. And, I think we've seen that managers like Pochettino, Guardiola, Mourinho have decided you can't, you just get rid of players like that who in the big games, there's just a level of work ethic that has to happen. And I thought that was the difference, the way the Tottenham's front players pressed compared to the way Arsenal's did.
Was this an Arsenal side that was a shadow of their former great self? We think about the great teams, 98, 2002, 2004. It's very, very easy for us to always reflect on those great teams that Wenger built. But is that a dangerous game with the modern Arsenal?
You think you just have to look, they've won 3 games away from home in the Premier League this season, and that's not what you associate with Arsenal. They were always pragmatic enough to do what needed to be done, to impose their will and their character away from home. And they can't. It's fine when it's going smoothly at home, and as you say, they're playing a team that they're expected to win and beat, and then they get into their rhythm. It's lovely, it's great, and they are a team that require rhythm. But a great team is one that can adapt to the opposition, and to be so It's almost like they accepted their fate at Wembley. Wembley's a place that Arsenal love to go. They could have gone there saying, they could have said, we've won our last 9 games at Wembley. This is our home. It's not your home. It's our home. And really strutted and showed some, I don't know, so just imposed their character. And they didn't. They let Spurs dictate everything.
Steve, you've seen some great Arsenal teams down the years. How does this team and their attitude, desire, conviction compare?
It doesn't.
Why?
Well,
it's the same manager building the side, the same mould.
I think that's probably the problem. You know, that is the problem. I mean, we keep coming. I mean, I've been on this show for the last 5 years, and we've been discussing should Wenger stay or should he go. I think they've reached the point now where it just needs a fresh pair of eyes, fresh impetus, a fresh voice in the dressing room. I looked at the Arsenal team yesterday, and there was Lacazette came on, and he's brought Aubameyang. It's a scattergun approach. It doesn't seem to be, you know, you looked at Tottenham, and as the guys have said this morning, there's a balance there. There's a thought process behind the way that team has been put together. I can't see that with Arsenal. I really cannot see that. And, you know, Aubameyang yesterday was up there pretty much on his own. Very little service. They seemed to settle for containment in the first half, and that seemed to be, oh, well, we've got to half-time and, you know, we're still in the game. But really, you know, they weren't in the game for me. You know, I just thought it was a matter of time before Tottenham got away from them. And the problem for Arsenal is, you know, everybody does hark back to the past, the great Arsenal teams. This isn't a great Arsenal team.
But that's our reference point, Steve.
It is the reference point.
The unbeaten side in 2004.
And I think there's a reference point also. There's a kind of a slight parallel with Man United. Obviously, they lost Alex Ferguson, went into decline for 3 or 4 seasons after that. They seem to be sort of finding their way back a little bit now. Maybe Arsenal are afraid that will happen to them. But let's face it, Arsenal actually are not at the point where they're now regular Champions League qualifiers, and that used to be the kind of the benchmark point for them. But it's no longer
minimum acceptable.
That's a minimum, but that's no longer the case now. Last year they're in the Europa League. This year, I mean, Wenger yesterday said, he's not going to target the Europa League to get into Europe, the Champions League. Well, he should do, because that's the only way I can see them being in Champions League. Certainly next season, they're not going to make top 4.
The only slight thing is that it does feel like that January window was sort of saying goodbye to the Ozil Sanchez era, and we are in week 2 of what is for in Wenger's eyes pretty much a new team, and they were playing against a team that sort of 2 or 3 years Pochettino's got them exactly where he wants them. That's the only sort of caveat you could say about Arsenal yesterday.
Jeremy, Ozil and Mkhitaryan, 2 really, you know, immensely gifted players, they were just not in the game. They were completely and utterly anonymous. I mean, Mourinho must have been watching Mkhitaryan thinking, that's exactly why I sold him. Exactly why I sold him.
Did you, in Mkhitaryan's performance yesterday, did you see the player who played for Manchester United?
Yeah. You know, he's hugely talented, we know that, but it's dragging that talent out of him. And, you know, when you've got Ozil in the side, who is absolutely fantastic on his day, but he almost had one of those missing days yesterday. And you can't afford to have 2 of your creative talents go missing on the same day against your arch rivals at Wembley. And I think that's what happened.
OK, just briefly, Jeremy, where does this end for Arsene Wenger this season? Because it's suddenly drifting into various comment pieces in the papers that this could be it. Could it be it?
I think it's possible. They must have. There has to be a plan in the summer to negate what happened last season, where the whole season was about is Wenger going to stay or go? And if he goes into next season, that begins because he's got a contract until the end of.
But would they really consider the nuclear option while Wenger's still in charge? Would they really do that?
As you know, I've always been quite sympathetic to. I think that the criticism of Wenger's been over the top sometimes, and I think when you compare Arsenal to Tottenham, even in the last 5 years, there's a decent argument to say actually, you know, Tottenham, Liverpool, they've not really outperformed Arsenal, although we all talk like they have. Having said that, I think the last 6 months, it's the most dangerous for Wenger and the worst, and the most critical I would feel that he deserves, because he's had all this time, he's had money as well, and if you go out of the Champions League in a year when you're not in the Champions League, when you've had that advantage of not having the games, I think that's the hardest for him to explain. So I think he'd be under. I think the Wenger question would have most relevance and is most dangerous for him this summer if they don't make it into the Champions League. And it does just feel like the League Cup and Europa League have become massive competitions now for him.
Yeah, sure. OK, tough times ahead for Arsene Wenger and Arsenal. OK, next up, we're going to talk about the clash of cultures. Pep Guardiola. Is he really trying to change English football? Right, another excellent performance yesterday by Manchester City. Beat Leicester handsomely and easily at the Etihad in the end, Sergio Aguero scoring 4 goals. But I just want to go back to Pep Guardiola and his complaints about English football and the culture and the mentality, Ali. Manchester City have written to the referee's chief, Mike Riley. They want to meet him to discuss some of the challenges that they feel a little bit over the top during the course of the season. Is he right to do that? And is he trying to change the way that the game is played in this country?
There's nothing wrong with making your views known to the Referees Association. It's better to do that than to gripe about them in press conferences behind their back, if you like. I have no problem at all with doing that. Last season, Pep Guardiola was sort of famous for his "we don't do tackling," and that's what was the sort of motto of City last season. We don't train to do tackling. What you're talking about, tackling's not important. And it was like sharp intake of breath, but that's English football. That's what English teams are good at, tackling. Pep, what are you doing? And this season, they're storming the division and they're still not tackling. He says he still doesn't train tackling. Now he's got his sights set on other people's tackling. But I think that might be going slightly too far. He has, I'm pleased to say, said he's not just talking about let's not be rough with the tackles on his gifted players. He is saying he's trying to protect all gifted players. But I think even within that, there is a certain snobbery is probably too strong a word, but it feels a bit like that. You can't get angry about tackles coming in on expensive or gifted players only. If you actually believe English football's become too dangerous, that's a different topic. And if you want the referees to look at the levels of dangerous tackling across all teams and towards all players, that's fine. I sort of feel slightly uncomfortable that he's as though he only wants to protect those special gifted players somehow. They deserve more protection. That's not how football's set up. You protect everybody equally. Everyone has the right to be protected on the pitch from an outrageous tackle, and we'd all like to think that no player in the Premier League goes out to hurt anybody. And often the worst injuries are very innocuous, that don't even involve contact. Often it's just the way you fall on the turf, or it's slight contact, or it's just adjusting your body shape and you turn your ankle and maybe snap it or whatever. It is rare indeed for someone's leg to be broken by a really vicious tackle. So I don't mind him having the conversation. I don't mind him making a list. I don't think it would work for there to be reviews of every tackle if the referee's seen it, because often in a game of football, it is about the pace of the game. The referee can tell the intent, what's really going on, and whether it was someone in good faith trying to win the ball. To replay everything and say, well, it was marginal, maybe it should have been a red. I think that would take a lot of the pace and gutsy stuff out of English football.
Do you want the game to change though, Jeremy?
Yes, I think what Pep Guardiola is doing
is... like basketball?
No, I don't want it to be like basketball.
No contact.
I think that we've taken great pride in we're the physical, tough league. We don't need a winter break. We're you come to the Premier League, and where has it got us on the international stage in the last 50-plus years? Not very far. And I think Pep Guardiola, if he can influence the culture of English football away from that mentality, right down to the parks level, I think he would be doing us a great service. And I think that him speaking, well, Manchester City is so dominant, is great, because nobody's saying, well, he's carping, because Wenger tried to do this, but he picked the wrong time. He didn't do it when Arsenal was sweeping all before them. He did it when Manchester United were sort of kicking them a bit, but re-establishing themselves, and everybody just said Wenger's whinging because Manchester United have caught Arsenal back up. Whereas Guardiola's doing it, well, Manchester City are right at the top, so nobody's really questioning his motivation. And I think what he's saying, if it infiltrates down that general message of how football and how successful football can be played, I think that would be a great thing for English football, because I think that's one of the things that's held us back in a much wider sense.
So do we just have to accept that we'll have to get all dewy-eyed and nostalgic about Beckenbauer and his recovery challenges, Paul Breitner, Maldini, Nesta, Costa Curta, Sol Campbell, brilliant recovery challenges in his career. That's what he was noted for. Is that just being? Do we accept that's just being phased out, or that it will be phased out, and we look fondly at those memories, but the game has changed and it's moved on?
I think there'll always be tackling, and there'll always be an art of tackling. I think it's that sort of emphasis on physicality and sort of intimidating your opponents that I don't think in the long run gets a team very far. It can work sort of in the short term. So I think just the nature of football, of course there'll still be tackling, but I think there's a certain type of tackling that, especially in this country, we've not really clamped down on in the way that they have done elsewhere in Europe. And I think we should listen to Guardiola, and I think, as I say, in turn, I think changing that culture will help us internationally as well.
Your mates waded in, and you were there for this, weren't you? Jose Mourinho. And he said that he missed... There's a culture in English football which he missed when he moved to Inter Milan.
Yeah.
After he left Chelsea first time round in 2007. I don't know, I always liked English football. I came in 2004, then left, and I missed it. I tried to feel English football as cultural and traditions. And he goes on to say maybe... there's always this thing in the tail with him. Maybe I need to cry a little bit more, which is obviously a reference to Pep Guardiola. But what was your interpretation of the way Mourinho feels about the game? Is there a very obvious and distinct clash of cultures?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, just going back to Pep, I don't think there's a conspiracy against Manchester City. I don't think the defenders in the Premier League have got together and said, right, let's go and maim some City players. I don't think that's the case at all. And I don't see a pattern there that wherever the City play, you know, teams are targeting Pep's players to hurt them. I don't think that's the case at all. You know, it is a physical game, and you asked the question after the break, Ash. You know, is Pep rewriting English football? Well, he is to a certain degree, because City are playing the type of football that he's always advocated in the Premier League. People said that couldn't be done. He's doing that now. He can't have everything, and you know, I know there was the really bad tackle on Sane by the Cardiff boy, but really, apart from that, I can't see any sort of systematic brutality being taken out on Manchester City. I really can't. I mean, I was at the Huddersfield game with Man United last week, and Sanchez was given some really sort of brutal treatment. And in each of his games against Yeovil, Tottenham and Huddersfield, he's taken some really tough challenges, and that's why Mourinho was referring to the fact that maybe he should cry a little. But even so, you know, you're always going to... I mean, football, defenders have always targeted the players that can hurt them the most. That's kind of goes back to the time when the game begun. If somebody's a danger to your team, you'll try to snuff him out however you can. Obviously, you know, he's got to do that within the laws of the game, but I think the referees are there to protect players. I think generally they do protect players. And some of the injuries we've seen, the really bad ones, you know, are often not as the result of a real malicious tackle. I mean, the boy James McCarthy at Everton this season, you know, Rondon from West Brom, just came through the back of him. It was an accident, obviously a compound fracture. I don't think that was nothing like deliberate. Obviously, Pep's fearful that one of his stars is going to get injured, and he's cited nine tackles this season. But I honestly don't. He's calling for, obviously, tackles that have been seen by the referee and maybe a yellow card produced to be then revisited again. And you know, I'm not really sure I'm with him on that unless it really warrants it. Yeah,
sure. OK. Let's move on to talk a little bit about Manchester City's performance yesterday, 5-1 against Leicester. I know that we're all at Wembley to watch the North London derby yesterday, but probably back in time to see Aguero score those 4 goals in a City shirt. De Bruyne, again, instrumental. And even Guardiola is running out of words to describe his, not only Aguero, but of course De Bruyne. But based on what you've seen so far this season, who would your player of the year be so far? If we narrow it down to De Bruyne or Harry Kane?
It's just De Bruyne, I think. It is just De Bruyne. there is something very magical about him. Yesterday, it's as though he creates a little force field around himself where he has that extra few seconds to decide what he's going to do. He's so unflappable, so consistent. I think he's got 77 assists since he's been playing top-flight football, which is more than anyone. That's the consistency of him, and he's selfless. He doesn't, you know, often you think he's only thinking, and I think he said it actually, it gives him more pleasure to create than to score. Those sorts of players are just a joy. And I'm not, that isn't to diss Harry Kane at all. Of course, he's phenomenal, but if you're asking me who to pick, it's because of that ethereal quality of Kevin De Bruyne. Where does he get it from? It's not something you can't teach. The ability to create those extra few seconds so that...
Yeah, it's pretty much what Pep said last night, didn't he?
It was what he said.
Yeah, about him, yeah. Jeremy, just quickly.
Yeah, I probably would go.
We've narrowed it down. Don't complain. It's two players. It's De Bruyne or Kane.
Can we put Salah in? Can we put Salah in the debate? Because I just think I didn't expect that much of him after the way he'd left Chelsea so quickly.
Same with De Bruyne as well.
And the way he's performed this season. But I think it'd be hard not to pick a Manchester City player, and De Bruyne has obviously been their exceptional player.
De Bruyne, the precision of his passing is just astonishing. I mean, the mind boggles sometimes. The couple of the balls he put in yesterday, you know, from angles, and he delivers the ball into the width of the ball, a space where only the ball could go. Just astonishing. Yeah. It really is. I mean, unbelievable.
He's not bad, is he?
He's not bad, but I mean, you know, Aguero yesterday, 4 goals. This is a guy who's been under kind of scrutiny all season. You know, would Jesus take his place? Would he ever play again, Aguero, for City? The guy's just a goal machine, isn't he? Phenomenal.
Can he do it on the big occasion, though? Against QPR to win a... Tony joking. They'll face. What are we going to move on to? Newcastle against Manchester United. Ali spent a bit of time with Rafa Benitez earlier this week. We'll talk about that game. It's coming next. Welcome back with us this morning, Steve Bates, Alyson Rudd and Jeremy Wilson. Let's just remind you what's in the papers. This morning we're all at the North London derby yesterday. The slayer, Harry Kane, and the stayer, Mauricio Pochettino, about to extend or confirm that he is staying at Tottenham. He's already involved in transfer plans. Steve's written that story this morning, as Paul Hetherington has in The Star as well, back page of The Sun. The top 4 goals for Sergio Aguero in the 5-1 victory over Leicester yesterday at the Etihad. At the top floor, Wenger, he says he won't use the Europa League to chase the Champions League. A bizarre comment. The Sunday Mirror, the perfect one. Mourinho, he wants a trophy for being the best behaved boss on the touchline. We'll talk about that in a moment. But first up, I would like to talk about this guy, Liam Miller, former Celtic, former Manchester United midfielder, Sunderland as well, and of course the Republic of Ireland, who passed away at the end of last week. And Steve, of course, you saw him play in a Manchester United shirt. Sir Alex Ferguson signed him, of course, on a free transfer, didn't he, from Celtic? What are your memories of Liam Miller as a Manchester United player and as a footballer?
A really quiet guy, you know, off the pitch when we used to see him, you know, mix zones, and he was a really quiet guy. Probably didn't get involved too much with the press because he was more of a fringe player at United. I think 22 games I think he played. When he was signed by Ferguson from Celtic, there were kind of high hopes that he was going to be, you know, a really good midfield player for United who could maybe force his way into the team. But of course, at that time, you know, United were winning trophies. You were still in the Giggs, Scholes era. Keane at United, so it was really difficult for any players to break into that. But Miller did play some games for United, you know, kind of a really tidy player. But I think that level was probably just too much for him. Played a lot of games for obviously Celtic and then Sunderland, 21 caps for Republic of Ireland. It's just very, very sad that somebody of that young age with a young family should die.
Certainly is, Steve. Thank you. Of course, our thoughts here on the Sunday Supplement go out to his friends and his family at what will be a very, very difficult time now and in the months ahead. OK, let's talk Manchester United now, because they do play Newcastle today. We'll get on to Rafa in a bit because you spent some time with him this week, Alyson. But Mourinho's been talking about lifting a trophy for being the best behaved boss on the touchline. Has he improved? Has he smartened up his image on the touchline? Have you seen any evidence of it this season?
Well, of late, I don't recall recent incidents where he's done anything eye-catching. I think what this is all about is that he used to be the eye-catching manager. He used to be the one everyone talked about. Jose Mourinho was the one that was flamboyant and interesting.
He gets the odd mention on this show,
and controversial and charismatic, and what he did and how he looked, how he looks in press conferences, how he looks on the touchline, whether he shakes hands with the opposition manager or not, does he go down the tunnel two minutes too early? Everything we have analysed in minute detail, what he wears. Does he smile too much? Does he never smile? It's always been about him since he arrived and announced himself as the special one. And now nobody's really talking about what he looks like or what he does. It's about other managers. Well, other managers are captivating us now. So we have very passionate managers. Up until recently, Conte was all over the place, running up and down, crowd surfing, going mad. Klopp is so dynamic and so eye-catching on the touchline. Whether they're winning, losing, or it's controversial or not controversial, the cameras are on him all the time, and there is a bit of still a love-in for Klopp because he's so different, I think, to managers we've had before. And I just think Mourinho's feeling a bit left out. What he's doing is he's putting his hand in the air and saying, "Remember, I'm interesting. I'm really interesting."
Is he interesting?
Well,
you see him every week?
I do, yeah. I think if you... certainly his touchline behaviour, and this is why he says he should be get an award for the best behaved manager, and he made the point that, you know, fourth officials should be the ones to vote for that, because he was basically claiming that he gives fourth officials a lot less grief than other managers. The question came about because obviously Jurgen Klopp had a bit of a meltdown in the Spurs game and was kind of very demonstrative to officials on the touchline and then on the pitch with John Moss towards the end. And, you know, the point was put to Jose if he'd behave like that, and they'd kind of ban him from football forever. And that's why he kind of came out with the Best Behaved Manager award. But, you know, he is less kind of high profile now on the side of the pitch. He's not kind of... getting into the kind of trouble that he once did. Listen, his rap sheet is very, very bad. If you go back in time, it is pretty appalling, some of the stuff he's done on the touchline. But I think there seems to be a new sort of calmness, a new composure, a new kind of maturity, if you like. He's 54, but about him on the touchline, he doesn't tend to get involved in that now. And, you know, obviously, I think he was done earlier this season for encroaching on the pitch at Southampton, but pretty much since then, he's kept his nose clean, I think.
Is it possible, Jeremy, given the mentality, given the culture, given the demands, the pressures, it's intoxicating down there, is it possible to remain composed and calm?
No, nobody does the whole time. I mean, it is. We had that night where Wenger was in the press box for the Chelsea League Cup game, and I happened to be sat behind him, and watching the way he fidgeted, tutted, questioned every... You know, there's a paranoia around managers during matches, and I don't think any of them can. But it's always completely. Okay.
It's always the top six managers. It's always the same names, though, isn't it? That's what I would say. We don't see Pellegrino or Claude Puel, Roy Hodgson. When do we hear about them losing it? Or when do we see that demonstrative side to their personality?
There is an element, I suppose, that there is less spotlight on them. So when they do something, and you know, you can think of like Pardew and Allardyce have had their moments. But I think that is true. I think there is a group of managers that have come in from abroad that are very calm on the touchline compared to some of the higher profile people. I mean,
so does that tell us that the high profile names, this is actually all about their egos?
I think there is probably I think there probably is something in that those ones with the biggest ego are a bit more generally agitated.
I think it's about pressure. And, you know, Conte and Klopp, two managers under huge pressure this season. Klopp to win something, Conte to stay in a job. And I know they haven't just evolved that touchline style now. It's been in their DNA since they started. But there's no doubt about it. They look as though they're two guys when they're on the touchline that are feeling the pressure. You know, you look at Eddie Howe and Pellegrino and Claude Puel. They don't look as though they're guys who are kind of have got a gun to their head. You know, whereas Klopp and Conte, they're manic at times, aren't they? But we like that. That's what we like. I mean, we don't want them all to just sit there and say nothing.
What sort of manager would you be? What sort of coach would you be down there?
Calm and composed.
Yeah.
I remember in 2000, I think it's 2007, Mourinho came, he always comes out with something, he was like, mellow Mourinho, wasn't it? And then he'd fallen out with Abramovich and gone about 2 weeks later, or 2 months later. And I think the good thing about this, at least it seems Mourinho's got his sense of humour back a little bit, because he's been pretty grumpy the last few years.
Yeah, OK. Let's move on to their opponents this afternoon, Newcastle United. You spent a bit of time with Rafa Benitez in the North East this week. Can you just give us an idea of his feelings towards Newcastle, the project, if we can call it that, at St James's Park, and his relationship with Mike Ashley?
Yeah, I was on stage in Newcastle with him.
On stage?
Yeah, and there was an audience.
The thespian, Alyson Rudd.
250 people in a cinema audience, mostly Newcastle fans, it has to be said. The amount of love for that man in Newcastle is... I mean, I knew it was there. I didn't realise to what depth it was. I tried to introduce him, couldn't finish the introduction. They were already cheering and clapping, and they hung on his every word. And he was remarkable in that. I think the club were probably slightly nervous about him doing this, because there are lots of questions about the Newcastle project. How's he going to handle questions about whether Mike Ashley should be more realistic about the price he sells the club at? Why isn't he doing more to get bigger names in to make sure they have Premier League status and so on? What Rafa did was just distill it all to, let's not get distracted by those questions. What I have to do and why I'm here is to make sure we stay in the Premier League, and I have to devise a way, and I'm not going to moan about what I've got, but I know what I've got. I have to devise a way to just make sure we get enough points going forward, which is kind of a dull answer, but the way he does it is he says it with such honesty. You really believe he is capable of distancing himself from the problems at that club and looking at how he can get the most out of what he's got to make sure they survive. And I suspect they will. It's a very strange season, and it's hard. I mean, who's in pole position to go down changes almost on an hourly basis. But I think there's just... If passion can get you anything in football, and there's enough of it up there, I think they've got just enough to see it through. And he was so polite when I suggested the way he beat Man United was to show his players a tape of the Huddersfield game. He went, don't worry, we have looked at that.
What about his long-term vision? Short-term is to keep the club in the Premier League. They're only out of the relegation places on goal difference, having drawn with Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park last weekend, Ali. But the long-term vision, can he change that team, that squad, enough to take them where he wants to take them?
I think he needs the club to be sold.
He's always operated at the other end of the table.
He needs the club to be sold. He needs a fresh dynamic there and money to spend. And he you know, they are sort of considered a club that should be a top 6 club. And I think he'd like to get them that. He was very good at talking about how, you know, OK, I did win the Champions League and was the architect of the miracle of Istanbul, but what he likes about, he's proud of in his career, is how he's taken, in the early stages of his career, he would take teams that were not expected to win promotion and win them promotion. This might sound stupid, but I actually think if Newcastle were relegated and the fans begged him to stay, he would stay and try and do it again. It sounds completely unrealistic, but there is a nice connection there between the manager and the fans. Yeah. And I think for him, getting Newcastle back to being a top 6-7 club would be as big as any trophy he's won.
Yeah, certainly is a big emotional attachment between Rafa and the Newcastle fans. Thanks, Ali. OK, next up we're going to talk about another manager who's got an emotional attachment with the fans, Antonio Conte. Would Chelsea be mad to sack him? OK, someone had to have the bright idea eventually. Jonathan Northcroft in the Sunday Times this morning, decline of the Roman Empire. Is he really committed to Chelsea and their ongoing success and future success, Jeremy? Do you detect any signs at all that Abramovich is losing interest in Chelsea?
I think it's different now than it was in the early years when he was just prepared to try and basically blow everyone out of the water financially.
He didn't try, he did.
He did, and they've tried to move to a more self-sustaining model. He's trying to do that. He's trying to commit resources and energy to the stadium rather than just the team, and try and build this sort of longer term structure. I don't get any sense that he's about to walk away, but he's obviously wants to do it in a different way, and I think he obviously knows that he can't just go on a sort of spending battle with Manchester City, PSG, even Manchester United. So I think things have changed, and that's why I think the manager situation is really interesting, because in the early years when they were chopping and changing a lot, I think they won 14 trophies with 10 across 10 managerial changes. So there was always this, well, it works, keep, the pressure, the tension, it's a sort of creative tension that helps the team. I think they have to be very careful now, because I think the key factors in those early years was, one, they had the most amount of money. That makes quite a big difference. And two, they had a dressing room of managers, really. They had Terry, Lampard, Drogba, Cech. They've all gone. So I think to treat Conte as disposable as previous managers have been treated, it would be dangerous, because it would ignore the landscape that we don't have the most money and we don't have a dressing room, which was almost your insurance policy if the new manager wasn't quite up to it. So I think they've got to be very careful with a manager of Conte's quality, what they do next.
I think it's amazing how the pendulum swung, because when Abramovich came in, his wealth was kind of jaw-dropping in terms of what the Premier League had seen before then. He kind of really did kind of rewrite sort of finance in terms of ownership at that point. But now, as we were mentioning before, countries actually own clubs now. Manchester City, even Abramovich can't compete with that. I think there was a time when he first came in where we all thought as kind of writers that nobody will ever be able to compete with Chelsea, because where will they have the finance to do that? But now, Chelsea can't probably compete with Manchester United for players in terms of maybe a transfer fee and wages, and nor can they with City as well. So, it has been a decline in that sense. And if we look at it, he hasn't actually spent huge money, the kind of money that Manchester United and City spend. He hasn't spent that money for a number of seasons now. So it's not a sudden sort of reaching this point suddenly that he's not prepared to do it anymore. He actually hasn't been doing it for a while. I don't think Conte's helped himself in the manner in which he's kind of constantly referred to the club's transfer policy. Clearly all's not well there, and it's a good piece by Johnny.
What are the options, what are the alternatives for clubs who, Steve says, you can't compete with the spending power of Paris Saint-Germain and Manchester City because of their ownership structure? Real Madrid, the pull and the allure of those clubs, Barcelona as well, of course. Is there another way to win it?
Well, you can hang on to your star players like Salah and De Bruyne, Lukaku, instead of being short-term about your players. Chelsea have the most, it's the biggest sort of academy in the country, I think. They really do hoover up all the young talent in the south of England. They've got scouts at every youth game. They have a remarkable academy, and they hardly know what to do with all their young players. They're either on loan, or they're trying to win.
They don't play them.
They're trying to win, or they're trying. Yeah, but that's the point. They're trying to win, Checker Trade Trophy, or they're doing well in the youth cups. But there's a load of talent there. And when they do get a glimpse of first team action, if they don't hit the ground running, they have traditionally been sent away or sold or gone on loan and disappeared. If you are Roman Abramovich and you want to run the club differently now, you've got a different perspective, you're thinking about the new stadium and acknowledging you can't compete with countries or own clubs, then you have to look inwardly, and you have to say, actually, we've built an amazing academy at this club. We have produced great players. We have produced teams of great young players. We need a manager, a bit like Pochettino, who's capable of having a holistic approach and looking at the youth squads and development squads at a team and working out who they can transfer and nurture so that they fill a gap in the first team, and just make it a bit more than... Because if you were to take Hazard out of Chelsea now, if Hazard goes to Spain, they're not really left with anything that is jaw-droppingly match-winning player. They've got to be careful that they don't stall so much. And I think they've got the resources or through years of Abramovich investment in those academy structure there, to actually just turn it slightly, tilt it slightly, and come at it from a different angle.
I mean, football moves so quickly nowadays. It's almost kind of, we're almost forgetting the achievement Conte did last season, when in his first season here he won the title in such impressive fashion. Really, that seems almost to have been forgotten now. Even at Chelsea, perhaps that's forgotten. And I think it's only because Pep Guardiola's just doing such an amazing job, and he's killed all competition this season in the Premier League, that maybe guys like Conte are suffering because of that as well.
The atmosphere on Monday night at Vicarage Road when they lost 4-1, and the circumstances, Bakayoko getting sent off, the songs that were directed at him as he walked off the field. Obviously, it's a family show, we won't repeat them. But the supporters were still chanting Conte's name. Is the atmosphere at the club toxic? Has it become toxic?
I don't think it's as strong as toxic. I honestly don't. I don't think it's quite that bad. But there's obviously this big friction over transfer policy, and Conte repeatedly makes the point that he doesn't have the final say, or he suggests he barely has any say in that. And I think that's been bubbling away for a long time. And Chelsea won't. I can't imagine they like the fact that Conte repeatedly mentions it. But I don't think the relationship is irretrievable. I don't sense that, and I think the fact that he's got this strong bond with the fans obviously really helps, because that takes a certain pressure away from a board to act quickly. So, and I think that Chelsea, I mean, it's difficult. I suppose if I think what Alyson said was really interesting about their academy and getting the man, because they've utterly dominated youth football in this country for a decade, and you don't see that translated into the first team. So if they say, right, Conte's not doing that bit of the job that we want him to do, that a Pochettino, you would imagine, would do very well, then you can see why there's a difference in philosophy. But if they just want the best possible manager, it's quite hard to see where you would go after Conte and be sure of getting an upgrade, because his record is fantastic.
On the academy point, why can't they cross the road from the academy at Cobham? Why can't they make it as first team players?
Well, the first point is it's very, very difficult to do because
we
of the
accept
quality
that, but over 10 years, come on,
few people,
one
few clubs. But yeah, it is the pressure on the first team manager, and the revolving door there creates that short term. We've got to win on Saturday. Do I risk putting this player in? He's more likely to make a mistake than the senior professional. I mean, it's difficult to do, but it is. They should have done it much better given what they've produced.
Is there a way? Is there a way to introduce players at Chelsea, at Manchester City, Manchester United? Mourinho's done it.
Yeah, Mourinho has done it. Yeah, and it's astonishing.
For all the criticism he gets, and
yeah,
a lot of it will be justified in terms of young players. But that's one player that he's put his arm around him and said, "You know what? I like you."
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you get the feeling that although that is in United's DNA to do that, and he would be flying in the face of tradition at United not to put young players in the team. He's such a strong character that maybe he might think he could buck that trend, but he isn't doing. I mean, if United or say Tottenham, Liverpool certainly had a player like Loftus-Cheek, they wouldn't be out on loan somewhere. They'd be in your first team, and you know, I can't see that order must come from high up. I don't think that's the coaching staff's decision to keep those players out the club on loan. I think that's probably from further up. For what reason, I don't know. But I would imagine if you're a coach at Chelsea, you would demand that you're keeping your best young players and you put them in the team.
Does it sadden you, Ali, about the academy system that so few players are able to make the transition at any club? Or is that just the world that we live in, the modern world?
No, it does sadden me, actually. As the mother of two sons, you know, you watch it happening and you see kids who are quite good at football, it's all they dream about. And if they get a chance at an academy, I mean, you know, it can be a big family event. This is amazing. And you feel like saying to them, it's probably not going to come to anything. Don't get too excited. And it should mean something. It should mean something if a club, no matter what the club is called, if a club with a name in the top 3 divisions comes calling and wants your child to be part of their outfit, it should matter. And more often than not, it doesn't, and they're discarded and they end up falling out of love with football.
It's astonishing that the players actually do go. Young players do go to Chelsea, or their parents take them to Chelsea and they sign for Chelsea. Clearly, they pay them a lot of money, but you know for sure there's no career progression for you there. So it's amazing that they have dominated youth football for so long, because people just still do want to sign for Chelsea.
Sure.
I suppose the message, though, to the young players, it's amazing how many players, the best, Harry Kane is a great example, they're not the ones that have come through that perfect conveyor belt of academy, and it can happen for you even if you've not had that opportunity early in your life.
Certainly can. Actually, we'll talk about a club that has got a successful youth academy. That's Southampton. They're playing Liverpool this afternoon. More on that next. OK, Ali, Steve, have a chat amongst yourselves. We're going to talk Southampton with Jeremy. Virgil van Dijk's return this afternoon, assuming he plays for Liverpool. What sort of reception will he get, and what sort of player was he at Southampton? How good was he?
He'll obviously get a bad reception. That happens. I think when a player makes it clear that they want to leave and there's obvious signs of tension behind the scenes and it drags on and then they get their way, it's a given that he'll get booed and whatever during the game. What sort of player was he? I mean, he was fantastic up until he got a knee injury this time last year, just January last year. And since then, he only obviously came back into the team at the beginning of this season. And since then, he hasn't been the player that he was before that injury. Now, whether that was because he was dissatisfied with not getting the move in the summer and it was about that, or whether there's still some physical catching up he's got to do after the injury is not completely clear, because he's not come in and been perfect for Liverpool either. So that's the interesting thing about that transfer, them spending a world record fee for a defender on someone who basically for the previous year hadn't played like a world record fee for a defender. So there's that little doubt about him. But he was fantastic for. I mean, he was a great buy from Celtic. He was a lot of the big clubs missed out there to get him for the price they did. And
when you spend a world record transfer fee, 75 million or thereabouts, did they buy a world-class footballer though?
I think they did. I think if he gets back right, I think he will be. I think he's the one defender that I've seen in the last few years that can really combine that physical, old sort of style strength and aerial presence that everybody says you miss in a defender, with being good on the floor, on the ball, as you might expect from someone who's grown up in Holland. He's technically very good. The only slight question is he sometimes just gets a bit caught out of position. So I'd say that's the thing. He can get caught with those little through balls in matches and can sometimes just look a little bit cumbersome in that situation. But a year ago I would have said, yeah, he's the best centre-back around. But
yeah.
Maybe Alderweireld, who we spoke about earlier as well. But at that point I thought he was as good as anyone in the Premier League. Yeah.
Just want to mention Adam Lallana as well, former Southampton player. Played for Liverpool's reserves in the week, got sent off, didn't he? Little bit of a struggle with a Tottenham player. Was there more to that reaction than just Liverpool first team player getting clattered a couple of times, having to play on a Wednesday night or Tuesday night?
I think when players have been out a long time like he has, you're kind of hypersensitive. I always remember many years ago going to Algeria for an England B game where Neil Webb was playing for England, and he'd recovered from a very bad torn Achilles injury, and he was sent off in that game for reacting similarly to a bad tackle. And I think it's symptomatic of a player who has obviously been out a long time. Been a lot of changes, in fact, at Liverpool since Lallana last played in the first team.
The team's moved on without him.
The team's moved on without him. Coutinho's gone, but they've found a new way to play and to win. And maybe he's feeling a bit of the tension and a bit of the pressure there. Hence his reaction, which obviously hasn't gone down too well with Jurgen Klopp. But I don't think there's any doubt that Lallana, when he's fit and on his day, he's a fantastic player, and he's probably the one player that I would say that Liverpool have bought from Southampton who has been probably the best, and probably will be the best, because I think there was a spell before he was injured, maybe a year, 18 months ago, where he was absolutely emerging and developing really well for England and Liverpool, and he's been a big miss for them.
Are we getting to that stage, Ali, of the season where players are starting to think, about the World Cup. Lallana not a regular starter for Liverpool, substitute at the moment. Danny Rose, substitute, of course, for Tottenham yesterday. Daniel Sturridge moving away to West Brom on loan from Liverpool. Is that starting to play a part in their thinking?
Yeah,
in the
it is.
half of the
And
season?
players who say it isn't, they're not telling the truth. Of course it is. I interviewed Mitrovic at Fulham. He's gone on loan from Newcastle. He's so passionate about Serbia, who were at the World Cup, let's not forget. I think passed a lot of people by that. And what matters more than anything is that he stays fit and gets game time. He had 4 clubs in like half an hour that could have signed him on loan on deadline day, and he couldn't eat. He was nervous, and he was partly so nervous because this is the pinnacle of his career coming up, going to the World Cup. He's not, and I said to him, and he was saying, I think I'm still first choice striker, even if I'm not playing first team football. But that niggling doubt that if you don't play it, will you be playing at the World Cup? We often doubt whether our players, the English players, are patriotic enough and give it the priority. I think most of them do, and I certainly think a lot of those overseas players who certainly seem to feel the patriotism more than our players show it. It is their driving force through a season. How will what I do between now and the summer affect my national team manager's view of me, and what does this mean for my summer? Definitely.
Yeah, OK, interesting stuff. Let's go back to the Premier League. I just want to talk a little bit about Swansea's revival, the renaissance under Carlos Carvalho. Sacked by Sheffield Wednesday, Christmas Eve, I think, wasn't it? It was around that time. But he's done a great job, beating Liverpool, beating Arsenal. Another big win for them yesterday. What has he done to change the mentality at Swansea?
He was giving the press cakes last week at their press conference. Apparently went round with a tray of cakes for all the... OK, irrelevant in the big scheme of things, but it's kind of symptomatic of his character and his personality and how he, in a very short period of time, has given a club momentum, sort of feel-good factor. And, yeah, I think he's been a breath of fresh air in the Premier League. He's honest, he's open, he's entertaining, he's sort of warm, he's good fun. I mean, that won't last forever. That happens with a lot of managers to start with. But really... amazing what he's done so far at Swansea. Yeah,
he seems to absorb the pressure. He seems to enjoy the pressure, doesn't he? Because those two games, Liverpool, having come off the 4-3 against Manchester City, their tails are up. They'd had a week to prepare for the game. He beat them. Then Arsenal, of course, the chaos on transfer deadline, around transfer deadline, beat them. And then, of course, yesterday's victory this time against Burnley.
Two big wins, but I mean, I think for Swansea they needed to get that appointment right. I don't think they could afford. They've had some sort of iffy appointments really, and it's not worked for them, and they've gone left field, they've gone mainstream, and it's just not worked for them. I think you would hope for their sake that it would work for them, and those 2 results were really key for them at a time when they could have been cut adrift really. So yeah, he's done really well. The key obviously is to keep that going.
Yeah, you think he'll keep
astonishingly humble. After that, they beat Arsenal. They played really well. He went on the pitch to get a shirt for his son, an Arsenal shirt for his son.
Yeah, he's had a good start to his Swansea career, there's no doubt about that. OK, we've run out of time, unfortunately, guys. Thanks very much to Steve, to Ali and to Jeremy for joining us.